You sound great. You sound great.
Good.
And we're live. So, hey, welcome to another Security Ledger podcast. I'm your host. I'm Paul Roberts, the editor at the Security Ledger. And this is another one of our Security Week in Review hangouts. And as we have done in the past, we like to go out and get somebody who is a expert and sort of Obi-Wan Kenobi in the security space to come and help us to sort through the week's events and also talk about what stories and what news they're following and they're interested in, and what it might be worthwhile for our readers and viewers to pay attention to in the world of IT security, hacking, Internet of Things, and some of the topics that we write about a lot here at the Security Ledger. So with us right now, we have Jody Brazil, who is the president of the security firm FireMon. Jody, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you here. First of all, before we do anything, tell us just a little bit about yourself and a little bit about FireMon.
Yeah, so I've been in the security industry for almost 2 decades now. Spent a lot of time at a company called Fishnet Security, a services company in the security space here in the U.S. And it was actually out of that company that we created a product called FireMon, designed to help better manage security. And so today we've got a product suite, a platform of technologies really designed to provide risk intelligence into where are the gaps in your security defenses that are most likely to be breached due to activities in the world. What threats are we seeing? What vulnerabilities do you have that, due to configurations of your firewalls or IPSs or other defensive technologies, have left you open to attack?
So this is really about managing the security technology you've already invested in, firewalls and so on, and making sure you're getting the most out of those products.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually believe that those technologies are really effective when configured correctly, and that's what we provide: better insight and visibility into how they're configured and what's allowed, what's not allowed, how are they working, and how should they be working.
Okay, and so in the news this week, we have what might be a kind of object lesson in in what happens when you don't do a good job managing internal security, which is the Target breach. It's not new news because it came out, we learned about it on December 19th, but there is some new developments just today having to do with the size of that breach and also how many people were affected by it.
Yeah, I saw that. What was the number, 70 million?
So Target came out and said 70 million people were affected, and that the data stolen really goes far beyond just credit card information.
Right.
This is personal information, addresses, emails, and so on, the other types of data that they collect on their customers. So, may not be full profiles in every case, but certainly more than just the credit cards, which is what people were thinking. Jody, when you read a story like that, you know, Target's a large, wealthy, successful, sophisticated company. So how does this happen?
Yeah, well, first of all, going back to the scope of the breach, this makes a lot more sense to me than when I first heard the news and they were talking about credit cards. And I think the assumption almost was that it was a point-of-sale breach, and I was trying to think what that meant. And you know, the successful ones that we've heard, of course, you've got things like, you know, mag strip readers where they, you know, do it an ATM machine, which is very one-off.
Right.
That's not 40 million people. You've got the slightly more broad attacks where somebody is in a parking lot and they're capturing the wireless transfer of data going from the point-of-sale system back to some processing system in the store. Again, that makes sense, and I see how that happens, and it has happened in the past, but not to the scale of 40 million users. So it had to have been a breach, and I'm very intrigued to know more about the details of this breach, but it had to be a breach that was systematic and at the global scale of the Target store, so the data all the way back to wherever it lives, not at an individual store. And so the fact that they have discovered that not just the credit card information, but profile data was taken as well, that makes a lot of sense when we're talking about the scope of 40 million or now 70 million credit cards or data elements stolen in this sense. So, you know, the question, how does a major company like Target do it? Well, I like to think about 2 things. First, the fact that it went from 40 million to 70 million, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, because I've only read a little bit about it, but I think they said that it may have started before when they originally thought it started. And this is
yes, right.
So I think it's one of the points that I've heard, and you've heard research before. I think Mandiant is the one that published this a year or two ago that said the average time between the breach and the discovery of the breach is 13 months. Something, it's extreme. It's not hours and it's certainly not days. It was 13 months. So to see that the breach happened sooner than they thought is also not overly surprising. I guess the first thing I would say about how does a company like Target suffer this kind of breach is they're not alone. This is not unique to them. And second is that there's a complete gap in understanding of what the security technologies that they've bought, and I'm assuming that Target has spent millions of dollars on security, what that technology is doing to effectively secure them. And I always like to think about it in two terms. The threat intelligence folks, your net witnesses, your FireEyes of the world that are meant to discover the breach. And I like to think about a CISO or the CEO of a company having two main real fears that they have to deal with on a daily basis. The one is, am I currently breached? Is my data currently at risk and somebody's stealing it right now? And the second one is, where is the next potential breach going to come from? And how do you answer those two questions? And you look at vendors, and you can throw me in this bucket if you want, but any security vendor.
You are a vendor.
Yeah, exactly. That sells a security technology is trying to sell a silver bullet. I mean, we don't admit it, right? But you try to tell that story. And I think customers buy it. They go out and they buy the latest next-gen firewall and feel like, well, I've spent that money, so I'm good. Or you even go and you buy a FireEye and say, well, now I'm protected against malware. None of it's true. FireEye is not going to claim that they catch 100% of malware, nor is the firewall vendor truly going to claim they stop all attacks. And yet that's kind of the sales pitch that we get. And maybe we're more successful than we should be in leading these large companies to believe that they truly are secure.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I was one of the people out there who really felt like, oh, this is going to end up being a point-of-sales malware infection that just ran rampant within Target. There was certainly a lot of news ahead of that breach and warnings about point-of-sale malware like Dexter. CERT came out last week and warned about the increased prevalence of point-of-sale malware, and it just seemed sort of coincidental, that we had this huge credit card breach. But there were details that didn't really add up, and I know one of those was when you read Brian Krebs' reporting, because he did some of the earlier reporting on this. One of the things that they were offering on these underground hacking bulletin boards or sites where people were buying the stolen credentials were zip codes that went along with the stolen credit card number, which I guess is really useful if you want to do a fraudulent online purchase and also avoid the kind of fraud detection heuristics. And people were commenting on these bulletin boards when you went on them, oh, it's so great to have the zip code too, that makes it so easy. And so that didn't add up because it's like, okay, well, zip code, that's not going to be part of the point of sales, purchase. And this sort of fills in that piece of the puzzle. What we don't really know, of course, are the circumstances of the breach. And I'm guessing if this is anything like the TJX hack, which it does look an awful lot like at this point, that it's going to be a few months or even longer before we know who is responsible and how this happened. But yeah, to your point, it is interesting to hear, of companies that are obviously, I think for Target is a leader in terms of point of sales transactions and innovation in point of sales, but also not doing the basic blocking and tackling on the security front.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we're going to learn that this was some brand new technique and very few people are protected against it. I'm very intrigued to learn more about what the details of this were, and hopefully we'll get some insight into that at some point. I have a question that I haven't just done the research to know. Somewhat coincidentally, I was in a Target around that same time frame, and I remember getting hit by.
What were you doing in Target in December? That's shocking to me.
Yeah, I'm sure my wife dragged me there. The credit card that they're offering, they pitched me on this, and it actually seemed really cool. And speaking of being an innovator at point of sale, they were the first ones I'd ever heard of offering the credit card, but it wasn't actually a credit card. It was a Target card linked directly to your bank account. Yes. But not exactly a debit card, because it was more of an ACH transaction, where they would just do an ACH transaction, so you don't have a debit card fee with your bank. And then, of course, their incentive was they were going to give you 5% off everything you purchase at the store, which is better than the 1% reward you might get on a credit card. So it made a ton of sense. No fees. They get target wins because they get rid of the 2 or 3% credit card transaction fee that they were paying to some credit card firm. So it seemed like a great gimmick, great point of sale offering. Do you know what the liability is on the credit card? The people that had the Target credit card, because it's not like a credit card. It's not like a traditional MasterCard, Visa, et cetera, where there's the liability protection.
So the question is, right? Are you also covered by the protections that go out to credit card owners that you're not responsible for fraudulent purchases?
And I guess
I'm guessing that you are.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I mean, it's an ACH transaction. It's like a direct debit of your bank account.
Yes.
And I assumed also that these were lost in this data theft, but again, I shouldn't speak because I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't know either. I know that Target was very I mean, I was reading about them in the wake of all this happening, how they were an industry leader in terms of speeding transactions and really streamlining the whole debit and credit card purchase. I think they were one of the first retailers that allowed you to sign prior to the completion of the whole transaction. So you used to have to ring everything up and then kind of get the receipt and then sign for it. And they were the first company to kind of flip that around, and everybody followed them. Yeah, so it's interesting. In a somewhat related note, we saw Bruce Schneier go change teams earlier this week from BT, and before that, his managed services, security services, to Co3, which is a company that does technology to help companies respond to breaches, right? So this seems to be a market trend in general, which is, as you yourself said, you've already been breached. Everybody's been breached, and the question is only how early do you become aware of it, and how do you respond to that to make your customers whole, and also to address the threat so that you don't continue to be re-victimized.
Yeah, and that's kind of consistent with his history, with the Schneier history with obviously on the managed services side, but he was really doing the log management and really taking that SIM approach, but more as a managed service for years. And the idea being, let's look at what's happening on your network so that you can respond more quickly. And I look at the world in NetWitness at RSA, or now I think they call it security analytics, but the NetWitness product, the FireMon's.
We know what it is, right?
Yeah. The FireEye products, this whole genre of products that really has captured almost everybody's attention in this threat intelligence space, and almost with the almost doomsday response to say that there's no hope on the defensive side, so just almost give up and let's focus on the response.
Yeah.
I think the pendulum swings a little too far that direction now. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely necessary. It should be there. A solution that does threat response, incident response, and technologies to assist with that. And there's a lot of those now coming up. NetWitness fits into that category where they're doing that post-event forensics that try to pull together multiple pieces of information. So what logs have happened? What alerts did you get from your Palo Alto, your FireEye? Let's go do a vulnerability scan against that host that looks like it was compromised. Let's go pull the registry settings from the box to confirm if it really was, and then a workflow to go through that threat response. It's good stuff. It's a whole area of the market that I think is important. I just hope the industry doesn't get too infatuated with it and believe that we surely give up on the defensive technologies. It's just swinging too far that direction.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen certainly a fair amount of M&A just in the last few weeks that is certainly focused around that threat intelligence and it's not hackback, but it's kind of there was of course FireEye buying the Mandiant, the APT firm, and Palo Alto also made an acquisition. I think was in the sort of advanced threat research space as well. So you're the head of a security company, security technology company. What's behind these acquisitions strategically? Is this just, this is where the action is and we want a piece of it, or is there a bigger story in terms of needing that expertise and that intelligence in-house?
Both. So I'll address FireEye Mandiant separately. I'd like your take on that one too. But on the general idea of taking threat intelligence or incorporating threat intelligence into technology, I think that's necessary, and I think it's part of the security wave. It's exciting. The street analysts like it. The security analysts like it. So it's part of a successful trend. But it's also necessary, and the reason it's necessary is it's part of the security intelligence concept. A great example is the vulnerability. Vulnerability management has been out for more than a decade. It's not quite a commodity market, but there's certainly a lot of players in that space. And what is it that makes a vulnerability really important? And one of those things is, well, if that particular vulnerability is routinely being exploited in the wild, you might want to pay more attention to that one because we have some threat intelligence to suggest there is known malware or frequent abuse of that vulnerability. And that's just good consolidation of two pieces of information, or bringing together correlation of two pieces of information that really we should have been doing for the last decade. We just haven't been. So that's great. The other is firewalls. Palo Alto is a great example. If you know that you've got a command and control machine out in the wild that is harvesting data from inside companies, why are you not just automatically blocking that at the firewall? Why is there even a question that I should deny outbound access to that kind of machine? So there are some it makes perfect sense kind of technology. Now the FireEye Mandiant, I think, is a really interesting acquisition. Now that one I think is about financial sense. I'm not certain about the business sense as much as I am about, I think FireEye had some cash on hand. It made good sense. Lots of people respect Mandiant. It brings a lot of respect to who FireEye is as a company. But talk about a giving up on technology. You think about what a FireEye could have done and said, we detect malware, and we detect when something bad is on your network. But today they do very little on defensive technology. They don't stop it. They don't go clean it up. They don't even go down very far on the threat response path.
Right. That's the sort of that's the value of traditional anti-malware versus the sort of advanced threat protection, right? Which is
I thought the natural response for them, or the natural direction for them, was going to be go down and towards the defensive technology, make an acquisition that would help you deny malware, or at least respond to it in an automated fashion, or at least in a manual workflow fashion. And they went the absolute opposite direction and said, we give up and assume you're going to be compromised, and when you are, now I've got a services team that can come in and help you clean up, which is a really interesting, I guess, pivot. Different direction than I expected it to go.
It really is. It really is, and it's interesting. There were certainly many on the sort of the logic of it. There were certainly a lot of people who said, "Look, FireEye has a sky-high stock price right now, and they'd be stupid to not use that money, use that stock to make some acquisitions that may turn out to be relatively cheap acquisitions in the long run." But so you get that, but yeah, it in a lot of ways it doesn't add up. But it seems like it's sort of FireEye saying, well, we're not going to go down the anti-malware track. Like, our future is really not where the endpoint security guys are going, but is in much more of this kind of services and cloud intelligence, kind of really hands-on role with the companies that we represent or that have our technology, which is interesting because, like you could certainly see them as like, well, they're sort of a new take on endpoint protection. They're doing what the anti-malware vendors are doing, minus removal, but they're able to do it in a way that's a lot less rigid. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it brought a ton of credibility, I think, to them. I mean, Mandiant's got a great name in the space. Yeah, I think it's going to be I think it'll be a good fit. I mean, I think they'll do something great with it. But boy, was that!
Well, and the question is also, does Mandiant? Is there more to Mandiant really than we know about? So we know about them as these are the guys, the kind of squirrely guys who go in and figure out when you've got an APT infection. But there could be tools and technology and and intelligence on the back end that they use in the context of sort of services engagements that FireEye could be looking at and saying, well, you know, we can productize this. We can actually make this part of our service. And
you're right. You're right. And they certainly set themselves up to be the de facto standard, or at least the trusted source of where is or what is the real bad malware out in the field, which is certainly a valued position.
And also bought themselves a lot of access within that Beltway community and a lot of very high-value government accounts within there. So, yeah. Okay, well, it wouldn't be, you know, this is the week. It's, you know, first full week in January, and so we've got to talk a little bit anyway about the Consumer Electronics Show. It is the big show going on this week. I've always thought it's a little bit of overkill to roll right from the Christmas holiday into the Consumer Electronics Show.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. So, I don't know if you've been following the news out of Las Vegas. I don't know if anything in particular has caught your fancy, but clearly there's a ton of interest once again this year in connected devices, intelligent devices, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, and some really interesting announcements coming out. But I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, so a few things that caught my attention. You know, outside of some really commercial things, wearable tech is the one that really jumped out at me, I think, from a security perspective, is this home automation and home security technology that I realize is not exactly commercial, but I'll tie it back in here in a second, which is lots of people, me included, really intrigued by this idea of automation in the home, whether it's for security purposes or for home, you know, audio-visual. But this idea that you can control lighting in your house, or the music, or the garage opening and shutting, it's going to do something I think really interesting, which is I think it's going to raise the consumer's awareness about security. I think there is going to be some tremendous, really unique stories about homes that are hacked. Where now an external attacker is now controlling the lights and the locks of your house. I don't expect that it's going to be you know, a big focus of attackers because it's just one home as opposed to 70 million credit cards. But I think there's going to be enough noise about it and enough fear with the consumer to raise awareness about security. And in that sense, I think it could do some really interesting things from the commercial standpoint of more of the of your standard employee, not the security guy at the company, but at every company, the standard employee having more security awareness, understanding the impacts of connected devices, not, you know, maybe it's their home device, but that connected device. And even this idea of cloud control, where a lot of these home automations from CES that they were announcing have got cloud control centers. You know, you might be familiar with Nest, not announced at CES, but a big part of that same genre of things that were announced at CES, where really the control framework is all out in the cloud. And what happens if that cloud provider is hacked? What happens if that management platform that is controlling the security of your house is hacked? I think it's going to raise some awareness with people, which is interesting. As far as the connected devices and the enterprise goes, I guess I've been off that train for a while, to the point that I don't necessarily care. I think the right answer for enterprises is to deal with it, and whether it's an iPhone or whether it's a newfangled, you know, wearable tech, it just is what it is, and they almost need to be treated like an outside entity. So almost like the same guy as the guy at the coffee house connecting to your internal infrastructure. It's an untrusted source, and it shouldn't be treated as anything other than that. So no matter what it is, when it gets connected, it's connected to your public Wi-Fi, not your private Wi-Fi. And anything beyond that is going to take special circumstances. Maybe instead of access from a mobile browser, it's access from a mobile app that you control, and now you control that application. So I don't see tremendous impact from the world of connected things at the enterprise. At least I hope not. I hope most people have taken that step to kind of separate themselves from this BYOD technology from the corporate enterprise.
What I wonder about is, look, you know, FireMon's sells, you know, firewall management tools and things. So people have had firewalls for a long time and yet have not been using them effectively. So for many companies, it was sort of, PCI requires us to have a firewall, or so we've got one deployed, but we don't really know. We haven't taken a look at the rule set, or we don't really even know what it's doing. And so your company comes along, helps them leverage this technology that's a common technology now, but that's sort of underutilized. Mm-hmm. What I wonder about is, do some of these changes end up kind of blindsiding enterprises? So they're not particularly concerned about connected devices. They're not worried about IP-enabled coffee makers in the commissary or HVAC systems. But to the extent that their employees are going to start bringing in and using this technology, is this something that really kind of gets in front of enterprise IT before enterprise IT really has their arms around or even has the tools to properly address it, right? So my sense right now is mobile device management is an issue and it's something companies are investing in, but that's about as far as it goes. And obviously mobile devices are just a small piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and this is, I know I'm not on the same side as everybody in the world on this, but my take on these devices is either they're a trusted device and you choose to manage them very aggressively. Mobile device management is a good example of that. Or they're an untrusted device and they get very little access. They should be treated like a public access device. So in that sense, if mobile delivery of malware, which I think is a very real possibility, that while the phone, maybe there's not that much rich content on the phone, but what if it can become the malware delivery device? It sits dormant until it gets connected to a Wi-Fi, at which point it broadcasts that malware to these other servers that do have really critical information. That's concerning. And the way you solve that is you either have really effective MDM technology that is controlling the version and applications running on there, or you treat it like a public device, and it doesn't matter what it broadcasts, because when it's trying to deliver malware, it's not connected to your internal devices effectively. And then that's where traditional technologies, they may seem antiquated when you think about malware like a firewall, but it's really basic technology that works. If you have a firewall in place that says these untrusted devices don't get access to this part of my network that is more secure or should be more secure, then you're done. The malware doesn't spread. If the access says nothing, no access allowed between these two networks, the malware doesn't spread. So that's my take on mobile, and I think some mobile companies would disagree. Clearly, that you should manage every mobile device. That's how they sell more licenses. But I know that many IT infrastructures are not set up that way yet. They're trying to get their arms around how should they take it. The CEO walks in and says, "I've got my iPhone. You better give me access to everything." Sure. So they do, which then the slippery slope to handing that out to everybody in the company now has access. And rather than effectively managing those technologies or effectively segregating those technologies, it's just kind of become part of the culture. Those companies that have taken that approach are going to have problems.
Jody, last question. Just it's early January here, so looking ahead, what issues are you interested in? What issues are you paying attention to right now on the security front? Either because you think they're going to be a big story, or you think it's a big business opportunity potentially.
Yeah. So a couple things. One you alluded to, which was what are we going to do with all this threat intelligence? How can we make better use of that data, not just so that we're afraid, but we've got this threat intelligence and now let's incorporate it with the rest of our security intelligence and do more with it. That's interesting. It dovetails a little bit with another thing that's got me interested in, which is security metrics. And I like to think about those security metrics from two very different vantage points. One is that ops guy, the guy that has to respond to events. And I think we've done an okay job giving them some dashboards, what vulnerabilities are there, what events are happening. The SIM has kind of come into play there. But the other one is the metrics about, am I better today than I was yesterday from a security perspective? That's an interesting picture that I don't think is well fleshed out, that should be the right security metrics dashboard for a CISO, rolling up higher in the organization. That's got me interested. Another one that's two others that are really interesting. One is DevOps.
Yeah.
And what's the role of security going to play?
Yep.
If you get to the point that you can roll out new applications and new servers in record time, and not just once, but continuously in this DevOps cycle, that every time there's a patch, it gets rolled out automatically, what's security going to do in that? And if you don't figure out a way to automate security, and I don't mean in the full sense of everything is automated, but with inside of several small controlled rule sets. So these servers over here are allowed to have access to these kind of protocols or these kind of servers within a framework, but then I can automate it inside of that rule set, inside that control framework. DevOps is going to hit a wall because of security, and we know what happens. History has proven that security is going to be ignored if security doesn't catch up. So they'll turn on the allow all until somebody says otherwise. So security is going to have to catch up to DevOps. Kind of along that same line, the last one that has got me interested is SDN. I really like this concept. It doesn't exist yet.
That would be software-defined network, in case there's
software-defined networking. There's a lot of really big, interesting things happening here. I'm very interested in Cisco's execution of their new strategy that they've announced. It's not supposed to be out until April. The theory is great. It's the key piece of what was missing with an OpenFlow environment was that every packet had to go back to the controller for analysis, which created the single point of, well, not necessarily failure, because you could have just multiple controllers, but it meant that you were going to flood these pipes, you're going to flood these connections back to the controller. So the solution was, well, you only look at the first packet, which meant that you weren't going to get any deep packet inspection. You also had a problem where you couldn't push access control rules all the way down to switch, because the chip, the memory, the TCAM, where these connections are stored, has very limited memory because it's really expensive memory chips that go in these routers and switches. So you couldn't push the access control rules down to the switch. So it was kind of a worst case of both. You couldn't do it down the switch, and you didn't want to pass it all the way back up to the controller. And the one thing that Cisco has announced is the service layer built into their router platform, which means that you can push down those rules down to the device in a services layer so that you can accomplish those security level things, deep packet inspection, access control, and yet you can still have this central controller concept, but it's all theory. It's not released, it's not supposed to be out for a while, so I'm interested to see what happens.
Right. So I mean, the advantage, as I understand it, of SDN is really that you're abstracting the security services from the hardware itself, right? So you don't necessarily need your deep packet inspection box or your IDS box. So these are all services that you can basically apply within the network. Is that right?
It could be. There's actually lots of different, and I'll just run through a couple quick ones. That, you could have a global security policy. So you could say, allow Paul access to the web server with FTP because he needs to upload the latest code to that server. Well, that's a policy, and you don't have to go implement it on the 3 routers and the 4 firewalls between you and the web server. You just implement one policy at the global level, and those underlying devices implement it.
And then leave that access open for about 4 years until you figure out that you forgot to revoke it, right?
But if you've got one central point of management and control, well, that's easier to manage, right? It's an easier manageability, and hopefully then you can have better control, better visibility into what access is allowed, and that's kind of what Cisco's selling. But from your point about, let's say IPS or malware or even packet capture recording, so this idea for forensics of doing just packet capture, you can do SDN can do some really interesting things like, in the case that you see a packet of concern based on whatever profile, I'm going to redirect that traffic over here. So now instead of having a anti-malware or an IPS or even your forensics recording or sniffer, if you're on the network side, in line everywhere and have to be plugged into a tap on every single switch, well, nobody does that because you can't afford it, so you don't put out 5,000 boxes. Well, now you can only have a handful of boxes that handle the bandwidth of how many packets are going to be sent to it, but only redirect the ones that you're interested in. And you can redirect it all the way over to this part of the network, even if that's not where the packet originated.
Right.
Now you're controlling the behavior of the network through simple software changes, and you can send it through an API call and say, hey, kick all this traffic over here. That's pretty cool.
Right. So
not real.
Better scrutiny, more analysis with fewer resources because you're not having to manage the entire traffic stream. You're just focusing on the bits that concern you.
Right.
Jody, great talking to you as always, and I thank you so much for taking time to speak with us on the Security Ledger Hangout here.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Have a good year.
Absolutely. I'm sure I'll see you out at RSA in a couple weeks, and hope to say hi to you then.
All right, sounds good. Thanks,
All right,
Paul.
take care, Jody.